Dean Koh, the embrace of human rights in the international setting often involves the entry of our country into an agreement, a treaty, convention, something which to some degree constrains sovereignty, shapes our obligations by entering into an agreement with others that they will shape theirs too. This, I think, is especially evident in the International Court, International Criminal Court, I guess is the proper name. But I think it is a reality which sweeps broadly across the topic of international human rights. And I think it is the source of some of the rhetoric that cuts against the commitment of our country to international human rights and the genuine fear that I think some people feel in the face of that constraint is also a factor that limits what our country willingly does in this domain. You have a very broad perspective on this, and I would welcome your comments on that fear and the rhetoric that ties into this constraint on sovereignty.
Well, welcome to the world of globalization. I've heard the exact same speech given by the Chinese government. You know, we have sovereignty. There's a limit to how much we can participate without giving way in our sovereignty. And I say, if you want to be in the global environment, you have to play by the global rules. Now, the fact of the matter is, the irony of this is that the United States has a lot to gain and very little to lose by ratifying these treaties. Our own conduct under our own laws and constitutions is pretty much consistent with these treaties. The only thing we don't do is commit ourselves to obey them. And then we end up on the side of others who don't commit themselves to obey them. So let me give you a clear-cut example. The United States, for many years, opposed the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They still do, in good measure, because it prevented soldiers from being committed to active combat when they're under the age of 18. When I was in the State Department, I raised this issue. And I often got from people who were defenders of our not signing the treaty and ratifying it, the so-called Johnny Tremaine story, which is, didn't you read Johnny Tremaine? Now, I did read Johnny Tremaine. It's a story of it's a hypothetical story, a fictional story of a boy in Boston who joins up with Paul Revere when he's 15 years old. And their explanation was, we have a long history of using child soldiers, and we don't want to really be involved in this convention because it limits our sovereignty. Now, let's be realistic here. What was actually being opposed is voluntary enlistment of students who are under the age of 18, because there must be some people who come directly from high school. And what they really did not want to lose was people who were leaving high school and would go directly into the military. But as you may know, the average age of high school graduates in America has been going up. And I spent, with several other colleagues, a lot of time trying to get information from the Defense Department of how many American soldiers were actually entering active service before the age of 18. Guess what the answer was? Less than 2,000. Most of them were 17 years and 9 months. When they do the basic training, that takes a number of months. Some of them could be put on administrative leave. Nobody has to enter before they're 18. And because of this, less than 1,000 people, on an average of 3 months per person, we were siding with the Ugandans and the Congolese in defending the use of child soldiers up to the, as young as 12 years old. Now, that is utterly irrational. Finally, we pushed to ratify the child soldiers protocol. And I got a call from a legal liaison from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he said to me, Mr. Secretary, the Joint Chiefs are in the tank. In the tank, it doesn't mean what you might think it means. It means that they're having a secret discussion in a place which is free from wiretaps. And they've sent out a message, and the message says, what would you do if there is a 3-continent war and we've signed this treaty where we can't use child soldiers? And I said, send the message back into them that if we're in a 3-continent war, we're in a lot more problems than this. that's not a reason to side with Uganda and Congo in defending the use of 12-year-old soldiers. And they signed. Now, what about the International Criminal Court? President Clinton announced in 1995 that he favored the concept of an International Criminal Court. But in 1998, when push came to shove, he did not sign the treaty. Now, the concern at the time was that the court would be hijacked by our enemies, quote, or it could be used to prosecute American soldiers. Now, what ended up happening was that since we don't participate, how do we expect to influence it to be better? I mean, the one way to guarantee that it's, quote, hijacked by our enemies is to not participate. More than that, we spent a lot of time trying to negotiate immunity agreements for our soldiers, even though they were fully subject to International Criminal Court jurisdiction in places like Yugoslavia and Rwanda. We were wasting diplomatic capital getting immunity from the International Criminal Court when, in fact, they had no immunity. And here's the irony of all. It turns out we actually need an International Criminal Court. We actually need one. It served the purposes of the Bush administration. They actually favored, not in the International Criminal Court, the prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic. They actually favored the prosecution of Saddam Hussein. They've actually favored the prosecution, again, not in the International Criminal Court, of Charles Taylor. They've actually favored the prosecution of Sudanese leaders. They've actually favored the prosecution of Uganda and Congo. They actually want these people convicted. And in those countries, they don't actually have a better solution. Our best solution in Sudan now is to get Bashir convicted and out and delegitimated. And it may be that it takes a long time for justice to come about, but Radovan Karadzic was indicted 13 years ago, and now he's in the dock. So the fact of the matter is, the Bush administration, for all of this incredibly counterproductive rhetoric, now has announced that it accepts the reality of the International Criminal Court. I think if they were smart, they would say, let's use the International Criminal Court to support a human rights agenda, because our sovereignty is advanced. It's advanced by being able to oust leaders of government, delegitimate them, remove them from the political discussion, without actually having to take over that country. You notice that because Milosevic was indicted and convicted, we did not have to go and occupy Belgrade. And that turned out to be a very useful thing.
Dean, you talk about globalization as far as human rights, as far as human rights, but a little bit closer to home, we're dealing with immigration in the United States. We are now putting up a wall between the United States and Mexico. Please comment on your ideas or some of your opinions as regards to immigration coming to the United States. We know the United States is a home of the free, home of the brave, justice and liberty for all. So please comment on that, please.
Yeah, I'd say, Mr. President, tear down this wall. I mean, does anybody actually think the wall is preventing people from going over? Give me a break. I mean, I was just in Berlin. There was a wall there for a long time. You know, if people want to climb the wall, they'll risk climbing the wall. If you're going to actually stem immigration flows, the better solution is some kind of diplomatic agreement with regard to how to do this. The irony of this administration was it came in with the strongest relationship with the Mexican government of any. And by the end of the administration, the relationship with the Mexican government, particularly on this issue, is in tatters. If I have a complaint about the methods that have been used in the last few years, we don't have diplomatic solutions to things anymore. It turns out if we had a diplomatic relationship with the Mexican government, a diplomatic relations with the Latins, if we actually engage these problems on a day-to-day basis, we would have a much better world. Now, the administration, for example, broke off talks with North Korea. This is my home country, Korea. Why? Because it was better to threaten them. As a result, what happens? The Koreans build nuclear weapons. It was when they turned around and started to negotiate that they actually started to destroy those weapons. And it comes to a very basic thing, which is we don't have enough soldiers to do as our only tool in the world